The Galactic Assembly had not gone quiet like that in over 200 years. Not since the Orlan submission, when a species had simply stopped existing as a free people and become something else entirely. Ambassador Pell stood at the human podium, a small, plain structure near the back of the chamber, assigned to minor species, and listened to High Consul Drev finish reading the declaration. Drev's voice was smooth and practiced. He had the particular tone of a being who had never once been told no in a meaningful way. The declaration was 12 pages long. Its language was careful and polite, the way a trap is careful and polite. It spoke of galactic stability. It spoke of resource equity and developmental oversight and the long history of the hegemony's role in managing the growth of young civilizations. What it meant, stripped of all that language, was simple. Hand over your colonies in 72 hours or the hegemony would take them. Pell waited for Drev to finish. Then he walked to the speaker's floor. He did not have notes. He did not have a prepared speech. He had been Earth's representative in this chamber for 9 years, and in 9 years he had learned one thing with certainty: alien diplomacy at this level was theater, and theater required the right kind of silence at the right moment. He said 3 sentences. He said that humanity had heard the declaration. He said that humanity would not comply. He said that Earth's position on this matter was final. Then he went back to his seat. The laughter started from the Draven section and spread. It was not cruel laughter exactly. It was the laughter of beings who found something genuinely confusing. A minor species, 42 years out of their home system, with 9 colonial settlements and no standing military fleet of note, had just told the galactic hegemony, 5,000 warships, 600 years of dominance, a political structure that spanned half the known stars, that the answer was no. One of the Draven delegates leaned over to a colleague and said something low. His colleague covered his mouth with one hand. Even the Shari observers in the gallery were exchanging glances. Pell sat with his hands folded and his face still. The session moved on. High Consul Drev did not give Pell a second look. The item was logged. The fleet orders were already drafted. In 72 hours, humanity's colonial question would be settled. Back on Earth, Admiral Dune Ward was reading the same transmission in a small, clean office on the lower level of Earth Command. He had been expecting it. The intelligence teams had flagged the likely outcome of the assembly session 3 weeks ago, and he had spent those 3 weeks doing what he had spent most of the past 30 years doing, checking everything that could be checked. He read the transmission once. He read it again. Then he set it down and picked up a secondary comm unit that was not connected to Earth's standard military network. It operated on a frequency that had been used exactly once before, in a test run 4 years ago. He said 2 words into it. "Activate Bastion." There was a pause. Then a voice came back, calm, technical, confirming receipt of the authorization code. Ward set the comm unit down and looked out the small window of his office at the night sky over the city. Somewhere past the moon, past Mars, out in the wide dark stretch of the asteroid belt where no shipping lane ran and no hegemony sensor station had ever bothered to point a telescope, something was waking up. He had been 31 years old when the project started. He was 63 now. He had outlived 2 project directors, 1 full revision of the ship's design, and a decade of political pressure to redirect the funding toward something more visible. Every time, he had argued that the most important thing a weapon could be was unexpected. Every time, he had been allowed to continue. There were people in the hegemony's intelligence division who had spent careers trying to understand what humanity was doing in the outer asteroid belt. They had filed reports about unusual energy readings, about supply manifests that did not add up to anything recognizable, about the specific kind of quiet that a project makes when it is being kept very, very carefully hidden. Their reports had been marked low priority. Minor species did unusual things in their early development years. It was generally not worth investigating. Inside the asteroid belt, in a cavity hollowed from a rock 200 kilometers across, the first systems came online. Power readings spiked. Lights ran in long sequences down hull sections that had never been exposed to sunlight. Automated crew alerts began cycling through the ship's internal network. In crew quarters that smelled of recycled air, and the particular kind of quiet that comes from years of waiting, people started moving. Dr. Aldo Bren was the first one through the reactor core door. He had built it piece by piece over 18 years. He had explained its design to 4 different admirals and twice to government oversight panels who had needed to understand, in plain terms, what exactly they were funding. He put his hand flat against the warm metal of the primary casing and listened to the sound it made when it ran at full power for the first time outside of a controlled test. It was a low, deep hum. It was the sound of something that had been waiting a very long time and was now, finally, being allowed to do what it was built for. In the assembly chamber, the laughter had faded. High Consul Drev was moving on to the next item of business. The human declaration had been noted and filed. Pell sat in his small seat at the back of the chamber and did not look at his comm unit. He already knew what it would say. Nobody on Earth had ever seen ISV Bastion from the outside. Not in full. The asteroid cavity that housed it was too narrow for that kind of view, and in 30 years of construction, there had never been a reason to pull back far enough to see it whole. Dr. Aldo Bren thought about this as the ship moved toward open space for the first time. The exit was slow, automated guidance systems inching a hull the size of a small city through a passage that had been carved exactly wide enough to allow it, with 40 meters of clearance on either side. He was watching from the internal viewport near the engine section. The rock walls moved past outside the glass, close enough that he could read the blast marks from the original excavation work. He had been there for that work. He had been there for most of the work. 18 years building the reactor, 4 more in final ship integration, 3 years of systems testing inside the cavity before anyone had been willing to call it done. He was 61 years old and had spent the better part of his career in a rock. The viewport brightened as the forward hull cleared the asteroid face. The stars appeared. Bren watched the rest of the ship emerge into open space, a shape that had no reference point in anything he had seen before, because it had been designed by people who had looked at every warship in the known galaxy and decided to start over. Captain Rail Stone did not watch the departure from a viewport. He watched it from the command deck, through sensor feeds and position confirmations, surrounded by officers who had trained for this moment for between 3 and 8 years depending on their assignment date. He had a habit, which his previous crews had noted, of being very still when things were at their most significant. No adjustment in posture, no visible tension. His second officer had once told him that his resting state and his highest alert state were, externally, identical. Rail considered this a compliment. The ship cleared the asteroid and entered open space. The automated systems ran through their departure sequence. Everything performed exactly as tested. Weapons Officer Kira ran the pre-departure check from her station. There were 41 separate systems to confirm. Some took 30 seconds each. She had run this check 6 times in rehearsal. Earth had spent 40 years watching every conflict in the galaxy. They had watched the Drava-Norland conflict. They had watched the Second Shari border wars. They had watched 3 smaller species get absorbed into the hegemony without a shot fired, simply because they had nothing capable of making resistance cost enough. Humans had taken notes, not just on what weapons worked, on what made a fleet hesitate, on what made a commander reconsider, on the specific kind of fear that settled into a ship's crew when something appeared on their sensors that had no reference point. ISV Bastion had been designed for that hesitation. Every design choice, from the hull density to the energy output of the main array, had been made with the same goal, arrive and be unclassifiable. Kira finished her check and sat with her hands on the console for a moment. She thought about a scenario her instructors had returned to again and again. They called it the most important scenario in her entire training. It did not involve a firing solution. It involved the deliberate, conscious choice not to use one. The harder she thought about it, the more sense it made. Sira Malik was at the communication station running calibration of the wideband array. She had written the message she would send when they arrived. She had started with a full paragraph, context, authority codes, diplomatic language. She had rewritten it many times over 2 weeks and removed everything that was not necessary. What was left was 11 words. She read it one more time. Then she saved it and looked out the forward viewport at the open space ahead. Rail made his address to the crew before the FTL jump. He had written 3 drafts. All 3 were too long. He deleted them and spoke without notes. He said that the ship was ready. He said the crew was ready. He said their job was simple: arrive, stand, and hold. He said he would see them on the other side of the jump. He closed the channel. In the medical bay, one of the junior technicians asked the chief medic, a woman named Osai who had spent 6 years in trauma surgery before this assignment, if she was nervous. Osai thought about it. She said nervous was the wrong word. She said she had a feeling that the next few days were going to matter in a way that most days did not, and that the feeling was uncomfortable, but that uncomfortable was not the same as afraid. The junior technician said he was fairly sure he was just afraid. Osai said that was also acceptable. On 3 hegemony listening posts at the outer edge of the Sol system, sensors picked up an anomalous gravitational reading as ISV Bastion entered the jump lane. The automated systems flagged it as low priority. A minor species with limited FTL capability ran unusual tests sometimes. Nobody pulled the report. Nobody read it. The jump was clean. 17,000 people lived on Arden IV. Most of them were miners or engineers or the families of miners and engineers, people who had come to the edge of settled space, because the work was steady and the land grant was real, and the distance from Earth's noise felt, at least for the first few years, like something close to freedom. The alert had come through at local dawn. Official channels, Earth Military Band, direct from Admiral Ward's office. It said a hegemony fleet was inbound. It said the colony's defense force was to hold position and take no action. It said that help was on the way. Colony Defense Commander Ren Adisa read the message 3 times. Then he went to the window of the command post and looked up at the sky. They were already there. 431 ships in a spread formation that covered the upper atmosphere from horizon to horizon when you looked up at the right angle. The sun was just coming up and the ships caught its light and scattered it. And from the ground it looked almost beautiful in the way that a burning building is sometimes beautiful before you understand what you are looking at. Adisa had 9 ships. He had just been told by his own admiral not to use them. He put the message down and called his flight crews to stand by. Not launch. Stand by. He had followed orders for 20 years in Earth's defense service, and he had learned to trust the people above him, because the people above him had generally been right. He was finding that trust harder to maintain than usual. In orbit, Commander Grath stood at the center of his flagship's command deck and looked at the planet below. Green and brown at the poles, orange dust at the equator. The hegemony's geological survey had been thorough. The mineral deposits under the northern continent were worth more than the colony's entire GDP over its first 30 years of operation. It was not complicated. It had never been complicated. He had done this 12 times. 12 worlds, 12 flags, 12 species who had stood in front of their populations and tried to explain why resistance was not possible. It was always the same at the end. A species reached a certain point and understood that some fights could not be won, and a rational species chose survival over a point. Grath opened a channel to the colony's command frequency and delivered his prepared address. He kept it short. He mentioned galactic stability. He mentioned the hegemony's long record of fair administration of absorbed territories. He mentioned the 72-hour deadline and the fact that it had now passed. He did not mention what would happen if the colony failed to respond. He did not need to. They knew. There was no reply from the colony. Grath noted this and closed the channel. Silence was not unusual at this stage. Sometimes they needed time to reach the obvious conclusion. At the system's outer edge, aboard a Shari observation platform, journalist Yale had been transmitting live for 6 hours. His audience was the largest of his career. Species across 12 systems were watching the feed. 2 Shari Council members had sent personal messages asking him to keep transmitting regardless of outcome. He kept transmitting. His analysis partner Das was reviewing data from the platform's deep range array. Something had triggered the sensors 40 minutes ago, a gravitational anomaly, large, inbound from the direction of Sol. The automated classification had tagged it as sensor interference. Das looked at the numbers again. Sensor interference did not maintain a consistent velocity. Sensor interference did not hold a straight heading through a gravity gradient. Sensor interference did not produce a mass reading that caused the array to recalibrate twice in 30 minutes. He pulled up the tracking data on his secondary screen. Whatever was inbound, it was moving with purpose. It was very large. The mass estimate kept revising upward as more data came in. He told Yale. Yale looked at the numbers. Yale looked at the camera. He decided, for the first time in his broadcasting career, that the right thing to do was say nothing and keep the camera pointed at the outer system. On the planet below, a mine supervisor named Halley's had abandoned the morning shift. He was standing outside the main entrance of the northern extraction facility with about 40 other workers, all of them looking up. The ships overhead were not moving. They were just there, filling the sky, waiting. One of the younger workers asked Halley's if Earth was going to do something. Halley's had grown up reading history. He had read about every major conflict in Earth's short interstellar story, about every negotiation and every instance where humanity had been told that the universe was arranged in a certain way, and humans were near the bottom of that arrangement. He said he thought Earth was already doing something. The worker asked what. Halley said he did not know exactly, but the admiral had said help was coming, and in his experience, when Earth's military said something was coming, they had generally already decided what it was going to be. On the Shari platform, the incoming mass reading revised upward again. Das calculated the arrival time. 19 minutes. He told Yale. Yale turned the camera fully toward the outer system and held it there without speaking. On Arden IV, Addisa was still at the window. His comm officer had just relayed the same anomaly reading from the platform. He read the Admiral's message one more time. Help is coming. He looked back up at the sky. The sensor operator on Grath's flagship had a name that translated, in the Dravan language, as second reading. His parents had named him this because they were sensor operators too, and believed deeply in the discipline of not trusting the first number you saw. He was looking at a number now that he had read 5 times. It had not changed. He ran the diagnostic, clean. He recalibrated the long-range array. The number adjusted slightly and then returned. He cross-referenced with the 2 nearest ships in the fleet, and their arrays returned the same reading. He stared at his console for a moment longer than was technically professional and sent the alert upward through the command chain. The alert reached Grath Station 12 seconds later. Grath read it. He looked at the number. He set the report down and picked it back up. He asked his tactical officer to confirm with fleet-wide sensors. They confirmed. He asked his weapons officer for a classification match. She ran the search twice. Both times the result came back the same. No match found. Nothing in the hegemony's ship registry. Not warships, not freighters, not stations. Not the decommissioned hulks from the Orlan conflict. Not theoretical classifications from military design journals. Matched what the sensors were reading. The object dropped out of FTL. Every proximity sensor in every ship in the Arden system triggered at once. The automated alarms ran across 431 command decks in the same second, and then something happened that Grath had never experienced in 31 years of fleet command. Nobody spoke. No officer called out a reading. No crew member confirmed a position. No weapons team requested firing authorization. The trained, practiced, disciplined crews of 400 ships looked at their sensors and said nothing, because the first thing their brains did with the information was not to process it, but to refuse it. Grath's weapons officer tried a size estimate. The number that came back made her read it 3 times. She looked at her commander. She did not say anything. Grath queried the flagship computer for vessel classification. It returned no result. He queried again with broader parameters. No result. He switched to the theoretical design database, which the hegemony maintained as a record of every warship concept ever formally proposed by any spacefaring species. The computer returned, analysis not applicable. He had never seen that response before. The object, clearly a ship, moving under power with a deliberate and unhurried velocity, had stopped at the edge of the system. It was not advancing. It was not targeting. It was simply there, and it was the size of something that had no business moving. On the Shari observation platform, Yale had been pointing his camera at the outer system for 19 minutes. He was now looking at something his equipment was struggling to frame correctly, because the sensor outline was larger than his display's default scale setting. He adjusted the scale. He stared at the adjusted image. He continued not speaking. His producer sent a short message through the relay asking if the equipment had malfunctioned. Yale sent back one word: no. The communication channel opened. The voice was human, female, calm, no aggression, no ceremony. It came through on every frequency simultaneously, reaching every ship in the system and every relay station within range. This is ISV Bastion, Earth Defense Fleet. All vessels in this system are instructed to stand down. The colony of Arden IV is under Earth's protection. This message will not be repeated. The channel closed. The silence continued. Grath became aware that his hands were flat on the edge of his console. He became aware that every person on the command deck, 42 trained officers, was completely still. He became aware that the feed from his Second Fleet's command ship, which normally carried background chatter and system updates, had been silent for over a minute. He looked at the tactical display. ISV Bastion had not moved. It had not powered weapons. It had not changed position or vector. It had stated its purpose and was now holding. Grath had 431 ships. He had a hegemony directive, a council resolution, and a legal framework that gave him complete authority over this system. He had been in difficult command situations before and had acted anyway, because that was what command required. He sat in his chair. He did not give an order. In the hegemony assembly, High Consul Drev was in his private office when the transmission came through on the emergency channel. He watched the sensor feed from the Arden system for 4 minutes without moving. His chief of staff entered and stood near the door. Drev said nothing. The chief of staff said, carefully, that the fleet was awaiting updated orders. Drev continued watching the sensor feed. The object in it had not moved. His analysts had added a size comparison graphic, the largest hegemony warship placed beside the sensor outline for scale. It had been on screen for 2 minutes. He had not looked away from it. He said he needed time to consider the situation. His chief of staff said that Commander Grath was also waiting. Drev said he was aware of that. On Arden IV, Adisa had walked outside. He was standing in the open afternoon air, looking up. The hegemony ships were still there in the upper atmosphere, but his comm officer had just played him the transmission through the external speaker. He stood quietly for a moment. Then he said out loud, to no one in particular, that he thought they could stop waiting now. The impact registered as a minor vibration through the forward hull. Not a shudder, not a jolt, a vibration, the kind that might come from a heavy door closing somewhere in the ship's lower levels. Kira Wen looked at her console. External cameras showed the fatting energy bloom where a full hegemony cruiser barrage had struck Bastion's forward section. She ran the hull integrity check. The result came back in under 2 seconds. 0 damage. She ran it again. Same result. She watched the last of the energy bloom disperse against the hull plates and thought briefly about what the hegemony commander had just spent on a barrage that produced a minor vibration. She thought about the scenario her instructors had called the most important one in her training. Do not fire back. She reached for the weapons activation panel. She did not bring weapons online to fire. She ran the power-up sequence for the full targeting array fleet-wide engagement configuration, every system live, running at maximum readout. The energy signature that flooded hegemony sensors across the entire system was not subtle. It was not a warning shot. It was a statement, made in terms that required no translation, about the full scale of what the ship could do. On 17 hegemony ships, automated emergency alerts triggered without human input. 2 ships began calculating FTL escape vectors before their captains gave any order. On the heavy cruiser that had fired the barrage, every deck-level alarm went active simultaneously. The officer who had given the fire order was a junior Draven commander named Veth. He had served in the hegemony fleet for 9 years. He had been in 2 enforcement operations. He had never been in a situation where a target absorbed a full barrage and responded by making his ship's own computer decide, independently, that it was time to leave. He opened a channel to Grath. He said, in a voice that was working hard to stay even, that he believed he had misjudged the situation. Then he cut his engines, broadcast his surrender code on an open frequency, and sat down. Grath received the channel and did not respond. He was watching the tactical display and doing something he had not done in 31 years of fleet command, counting the ships that were withdrawing without his authorization. 3, then 6, then 11. They were not running in panic. They were executing deliberate FTL jumps to safe distance, moving to a range where the sensors would stop returning data that their crews found difficult to process. His second-in-command said something to him. He heard the words but not the meaning. He was thinking about the firing solution. ISV Bastion had targeting data on every ship in his fleet. He knew this because his own tactical computer was modeling the engagement scenario in real time, and the model had stopped producing output and returned the same status his weapons officer had reported earlier. Analysis not applicable. He looked at the weapons array readout from Bastion, still powered, still pointed at his fleet, still not firing. It had been 4 minutes and 20 seconds since the barrage hit. On the Shari observation platform, Yale had been transmitting without interruption for 11 hours. His producer had stopped asking questions and was simply keeping the relay open. Yale watched the readout data on his secondary screen. He watched 11 more hegemony ships execute FTL jumps to distance. He watched the surrender broadcast from Veth's cruiser propagate across every open channel in the system. He said, "I want to be precise about the sequence of events because I think the sequence is the part that matters." The human ship was struck by a full fleet barrage. It did not fire back. It powered its weapons array and let every ship in the system read what that meant. The ship that fired has already surrendered. Sections of the hegemony fleet are withdrawing without orders. He paused for a moment. He said, "In 22 years of covering galactic affairs, I have reported on 4 major conflicts, 8 border disputes, and 2 species absorptions. I do not have a reference point for what I am watching right now. ISV Bastion has still not fired a single shot." In the Galactic Assembly, Ambassador Pell had been waiting in his office for 2 hours. He had a simple message drafted and ready to send. He had been waiting for the correct moment, not a dramatic one, just the right one. He sent it. It said that humanity would like to return to the matter of the colonial territories. It said he was available to discuss at the Assembly's convenience. It said he would wait 30 minutes for a response. He received a response in 11 minutes. High Consul Drev's office initiated the contact. The message was brief. It said the Assembly was prepared to convene. It used formal language that had been carefully constructed to say nothing about what had happened in the Arden system, while also being entirely about what had happened in the Arden system. Pell read it once. He sent a single-word confirmation. Then he walked to the small window in his office and stood there looking at the orbital view of the neutral station. Down in Arden IV's orbit, Grath had 19 ships left in functional formation. The rest had either withdrawn to FTL distance or gone to emergency hold. He had received no updated orders from the High Consul. He had Bastion on his screen, unmoving, weapons array still live. He composed the fleet withdrawal order. He sent it without requesting confirmation from the High Consul's office. Some decisions, he had learned that day, required you to make them yourself. The recall order reached Grath while he was composing a message to his own records office. It came through on the Command Authority channel, the one that bypassed fleet protocols, marked with the High Consul's authorization code. He read it. He sat with it for a moment. He had spent 31 years in the hegemony military. He had followed orders across 4 conflicts and 2 border actions and 12 colonial enforcement operations. He had never once, in 31 years, written a resignation letter while still in active command. He was writing one now. Not out of shame. He was too old for shame to be the first feeling. He was writing it because he understood, sitting in his command chair with the recall order on his screen and ISV Bastion still on his sensor display, that the version of the galaxy his career had been built on had quietly stopped being the current version. The career that fit that galaxy no longer matched the one that fit this one. He sent the recall to the remaining fleet and set a clear withdrawal route out of the system. His navigation officer noted something as the fleet began moving. ISV Bastion, which had held its position without moving for over 2 hours, opened a short-range communication channel to the hegemony flagship. The message was not words. It was a standard courtesy signal, a navigational clearance code, acknowledging the fleet's departure vector and confirming open passage. The navigation officer looked at the code for a moment. It was the kind of signal that one fleet sent to another as a matter of professional courtesy. No aggression, no record of what had happened. Just, "Here is your lane, you may use it safely." She said quietly that the humans were giving them a way home. Grath did not respond. He approved the departure heading and did not look at the Bastion sensor feed again. Below on Arden IV, Adisa watched the last of the hegemony ships clear the upper atmosphere. He was standing outside the command post in the early afternoon light. His 9 ships were still on standby. They had never launched. His youngest crew member, a 23-year-old technician 8 months into her first posting, came and stood next to him and asked if it was over. Adisa thought about the question carefully. He said, "This part is." In the Galactic Assembly, the emergency session Pell had requested was the fastest convened in 300 years of recorded assembly history. High Consul Drev chaired it. He did not speak at length. He moved through the procedural steps with the controlled expression of someone who understood that the least dignified available option was significantly better than the alternative. The vote to revoke the colonial restrictions on humanity passed with 63% support. The Orland delegation voted in favor. They did not hide the fact that they were pleased. One of their senior delegates, an elderly woman who had been in the assembly for 20 years, remained in her seat long after the vote, looking at nothing in particular, with an expression that was not quite a smile but was the closest thing to one her face could arrange. The Shari delegation sent Pell a private message before the formal results were announced. It said they wanted to discuss trade. It said they had wanted to discuss trade for some time. It said, in language that was slightly less formal than the rest of the message, that they had been waiting to see if it was worth the risk, and that they now had their answer. Pell sent back 3 words, "Our door is open." In the following 72 hours, Earth received official contact from 11 species. Some wanted defense consultations. Some wanted trade routes. Some wanted to understand, technically and diplomatically, how a civilization classified by the hegemony as a developing minor species had constructed something the hegemony's own databases could not categorize. One species, a quiet, old civilization on the far edge of Shari space that had not made official contact with any other species in 60 years, sent a single message to Earth's representative. It said, "We thought we were the only ones who remembered how to wait." Earth's diplomatic office took 2 full days to compose a reply careful enough to deserve that message. On ISV Bastion, making its way back toward the Sol system, Captain Rail Stone had finally left the command deck. He was on the forward observation tier, standing at the wide viewport, watching the stars pass at sub-FTL speed. Sira Malik found him there. She had her own reason for coming to the observation tier. It was where she went when a long shift ended and she needed to stop thinking for a while. She had not expected company. She asked if he was satisfied with how it had gone. He thought about it, not as a diplomatic answer, as an honest one. He said he was relieved. She asked why relieved and not proud. He thought about Kira at the weapons panel, hand on the activation control, making a deliberate and careful choice. He thought about Bren in the reactor room, listening to an engine that had never been used to hurt anything. He thought about a hegemony fleet given a courtesy signal and a clear lane instead of a firing solution. He said that pride was for what you built, relief was for what you did not have to destroy. She considered that. Then she nodded and stood with him at the viewport, and they both watched the stars. Somewhere behind them, hundreds of hegemony warships were making their way home along different routes. Every captain was composing an after-action report. Every report contained the same information, phrased differently but meaning the same thing. Humanity had been building something in the dark for 30 years. The galaxy had not been paying close enough attention.